An EU summit to end the Eurozone crisis has concluded once again, leaving more questions than answers. A sense of common purpose towards closer fiscal union emerged, but shorter-term firefighting measures were few and far between. Joining me now to discuss where the Eurozone goes from here is Meagn Greene, Senior Economist at Reuters Global Economics. Meagn, thanks for joining us. One of the gaping holes from the deal seemed to be on the financing side. 200 billion extra via the IMF sounds a lot, but it's not, is it? And the ESM was capped at 500 billion. Where is the funding going to come from?
Yeah, so the 200 billion from the IMF on its own is not enough to support Italy and Spain. You could add to that money from the ESM and also some security markets purchases from the ECB. So you could get up to around 800 billion if you accept that the ESM will be accelerated. And that's enough to take Italy and Spain out of the markets entirely for about a year and a half, a year and 3/4, at which point they'll have to return to the markets. And the governments in Italy and Spain have come in, and the first thing they have to do is implement austerity measures, which will undermine growth. So in a year and a half, both countries will probably look worse than they do now. And I don't think that investors will really want to hold that debt then any more than they do now.
But that buys time, a year and a half or more perhaps, and the ECB's cap, if it sticks to the cap of 20 billion per week, times 52, that's over 1 trillion euros per year. That sounds quite impressive, isn't it?
So that is a lot. The ECB has only actually hit that cap once. But, you know, I think the ECB has said that it's insistent on upholding the spirits of the treaties. And so that's a cap, that's a ceiling. I don't think the ECB will regularly be hitting that because I think that the ECB will stay true to the idea that the central bank shouldn't be monetizing debt.
Something that went under the radar on Friday, or it seemed to, with the summit going on, was the EBA and their new capital requirements for European banks. European banks have to raise more capital than they thought 2 months ago. How can this nexus, the sovereign and banking nexus, be broken?
Well, both the banking crisis and the sovereign crisis really need to be addressed simultaneously. And the ECB, the measures that it announced last Thursday, really help with liquidity issues in the banking sector. But the ECB sort of said, over to you, politicians, to deal with the sovereign sector. And it's that part that's not really being dealt with.
Looking ahead to the longer-term framework, there seems to be a sort of asymmetry here. The fiscally weak countries in the Eurozone have to get themselves up to German rules and standards, but there's not much about Germany moving itself towards a more domestically driven economy. Does that mean that it's inherently flawed?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Merkel's touted this as first steps towards fiscal union, but in and of itself, these proposals aren't fiscal union at all. They just really institutionalize the asymmetric adjustment that's been occurring in the Eurozone already, with the peripheral countries making all of the adjustment, and the core countries making none of it. And it just means that as the peripheral countries continue to implement harsh austerity measures, it will undermine GDP growth. So we won't see growth in the Eurozone for a few years as long as this is the case.
And that seems to be the crux of the matter. It's a growth strategy, or the lack of a growth strategy, that's at play here. What should the policymakers be doing?
Well, in order to get growth in the Eurozone, a few things all need to happen at the same time. The ECB needs to cut rates really aggressively to close to zero. The ECB needs to talk down the euro so that it depreciates on par with the US dollar. The core countries need to provide fiscal stimulus for the peripheral countries. And the chances of each one of these things happening is very low. The chances of all of them happening at once, close to zero.
But would the ECB lowering rates down towards zero, would that really have a material impact?
It would help, certainly, but it's a necessary but not sufficient condition. It needs to help occur in Congress with these other measures.
And equally, it's going to be very difficult to convince countries to increase their fiscal expansion, to spend more on growth, when they're saddled with these huge debts.
That's true. I was recently at a conference with a bunch of CDU members of parliament in Germany, and we had an entire panel on fiscal austerity in Germany. And so the notion that Germany would provide fiscal stimulus is absolutely not on the table.
Meagn Greene, thank you very much. Well, that's it for now. My thanks there to Meagn Greene from Reuters Global Economics. I'm Jamie McGeever. This is Reuters.